There is another in the fire. talk about something that I am extremely passionate about, and that is I am the host of the Unashamed Recovery Podcast. And the Unashamed Recovery Podcast is basically what we're here doing tonight. We interview people, they come on and they share their story of addiction, what their drug of choice was, where it led them, the rock bottom they hit, and how they overcame it. And the motto of our show is to break the stigma and the shame of addiction and recovery by sharing real stories of real addiction from real people in real recovery. And this past year, out of, I think, 2.4 million podcasts a day, we are in the top 5% of that worldwide. So God is moving and doing big things through the podcast. We are being downloaded in 42 countries around the world, somewhere in the neighborhood of 750, 760 cities here in America, in all 50 states. And man, it is awesome to see God take this and to expand it and to bless it. You can find us on all the major apps: Apple, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, YouTube, you name it. And I want to encourage you, if you are tech savvy, and if you have the ability to, I encourage you to share our episodes or our posts, because I'm going to tell you a story about the power of sharing. Back last year we had an episode with a young lady, and she had a severe opioid addiction from just a prescription for being in a wreck. And with just that, she went from having an opioid addiction to forging prescriptions. And at the time of her arrest, she had over 200 prescriptions in her backpack, and they were not to sell, to distribute. Those prescriptions were just for her. Well, anyway, to date, that is our highest downloaded podcast episode. People have shared that, and we found out last year that that episode had made its way all the way across the world to a tiny village in Beirut, a village that was 70 to 80% women. And all of these women in that village had a opioid addiction, or opium addiction. I can't remember which one. But anyway, regardless, after they heard her story and they heard the hope that is recovery, that village now has a recovery center, and the women are going and getting healed, and they're getting sober from that. So I encourage you to share, because sharing gets the word out, it gets the hope out, it gets the message of Christ out. And if you can't share, pray. We always love prayer for the podcast, and I appreciate that. And anyway, we're going to move on, because you did not come here tonight to hear me talk about the Unashamed Recovery Podcast. You came here tonight to hear a testimony, and I'm excited to be here. And as excited as I am to be here tonight, I must warn y'all that I have been invited here to share a very uncomfortable message, uncomfortable truth, and that is my story, my rescue story. And for there to be a rescue story, there must be implications or signs or trouble of dangerous conditions. For me, it was a pit, and that pit was pornography. I used to think that my story was 1 in a million, and I got into recovery, and I realized that my story is actually more like 1 in 10. 1 in 10 men struggle with unwanted, compulsive sexual behavior. That's 1 in 10. That's over 15 million men. Over 67% of men admit to some form of porn addiction. Did you know that in 2013, Pornhub, the world's largest porn website, had over 14 billion visits? That averages to 1.68 million visits per hour for the entire year. So, chances are somebody here tonight is in the same pit that I used to be in, struggling with this addiction. And we all think we're struggling alone with this because nobody wants to talk about it. We especially don't want to talk about it here in the church. Well, it's time that we stop sweeping this under the rug, hoping that it goes away, because it's not. I'm talking about it tonight, and I believe that God is going to set somebody free from those chains. tonight I share my story in hopes that my hindsight will be your foresight. So let's open up with a quick word of prayer and we're going to get started. Father, bless this testimony for your purposes and for your will, Father. And I pray that you will help me to become less so that you can become more, Father. And Father, I pray that your Spirit will be here among us and that you will touch somebody here tonight that needs to hear a message of hope and that somebody will leave a changed person. And all these things I pray in your Son, Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right. My story starts around at the age of 6 when I was introduced to a picture of the monthly Playmate that was hanging on a car air freshener. Can y'all still hear me?
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir.
All right. That was hanging on a car air freshener that was in my grandfather's paperwood truck. And so the chains of addiction were set. Now, I didn't die from this encounter. I didn't go to prison. I didn't lose everything. And there was no rock bottom. In fact, not much changed at all. I mean, this is a little uncomfortable, but I can still get around. I can still go on about my day-to-day in a normal fashion. But that's the thing with addiction, isn't it? The chains of addiction are too light to be felt at first until they're too heavy to be broken. Now, I wouldn't have another encounter with pornography for a few years. And that was in 6th grade when a friend of mine handed me an issue of the Playboy Lingerie Edition. And I walked around with my head buried in this magazine for months. And I didn't know it was bad. I just knew I liked the way that it made me feel. All the while I was getting more and more bound to it. You see, the devil didn't come to me dressed in a red cape and pointy horns. He came to me as everything that I had wished for. I didn't choose evil because it was evil. I only mistook it for the happiness that I was searching after. Now, years later, in the summer of my sophomore year, I attended my church's youth camp. And I had an extraordinary experience with the Holy Spirit. And I came home on fire for God. And I got more involved with my church group, with my church family, Christian groups at my high school. And a few months later, I felt this strong call to go into ministry. And it terrified me. I thought, there's no way that I could go and bring people to Christ after the things that I've been struggling with, after those chains. So I did like Jonah, and I ran from God. And I ran from the calling that was on my life. And I ran straight to the first girl that would have anything to do with me. And it wasn't long before I lost my virginity to her. And just like that, those old chains were back on. And over the next few years of school, I would bounce around from girl to girl, and my porn addiction grew along with this. The one fed the other. I had dug myself into a pit, and I just didn't know it. Now, after high school, I moved off from small town USA, and I moved to the big city for college. And my roommate introduced me to high-speed internet. Now, guys, I'm from a farm. I grew up on a farm down in southeast Mississippi. I did not know high-speed internet existed. It blew my mind. And once again, I secluded myself from everyone and everything as I engulfed myself in more pornography. And I stopped attempting to have girlfriends. I was too busy consumed by my pornography addiction. And I began to stray from that Christian life that I'd known all my life. I stopped attending church. I stopped praying. I stopped reading my Bible. I stopped talking to my Christian friends. Now, also during this same time, that same roommate introduced me to my now wife, Annabeth, who is here with me tonight.
Hey,
Didn't mean to embarrass you. I'll hear about that on the way home. But fast forward a few years, and we did get married. We began our life together. And I'd always assumed that once I was married, I would no longer need pornography, that I'd be able to quit. And that just wasn't the case. I found myself depending on it more. And then in 2014, we had our first daughter, and I'd always assumed once I had kids, I'd be able to quit. That wasn't the case either. In fact, it got worse. a lot worse. During this time, I was viewing pornography for over probably 10 hours a day, constantly scrolling through image after image, video after video, scrolling through unfiltered filth, looking for my next high. And I was trying to fill a void that I just couldn't fill. The pit had now swallowed me. Now, we're going to fast forward to 2015, and that's when I walked through the doors of North Park Celebrate Recovery in Meridian. And that was after my wife had found saved porn on my phone. I didn't know what I was showing up for, or what I was showing up to, or what to expect, but I went anyway. I walked through that door full of fear, full of shame, and I was looking for hope. I walked through that door despite all hesitation, and you know what? I found where I belonged. Amen. All my life, I felt like a black sheep, but that night, when I found that group, I found the rest of my herd. That night, in a circle among strangers, I realized that shame dies when my secrets are shared in safe places. And I wish I could tell you that that's where my story ends. And that after that first night, all of my problems were solved. And that I healed from my addiction. And that I went on to years of successful recovery. And it was just all rainbows and pixie dust. But it wasn't. You notice I still got part of this chain on me. I was trying to do recovery, and I was still trying to do my addiction. And I would stumble several times after that first meeting, but it would be another 2 years until my biggest fall. You see, at a time when my porn addiction was at an all-time high, I found myself at my all-time lowest. It was 2017, and my porn had grown to new heights. I was searching for very dark and depraved things, perverse and sickening things. And because of pornography, I was now crossing the lines of things that once repulsed me. And I knew what I was doing was wrong. I had very strong convictions about that. After all, I was raised up in the Pentecostal church. That's right, I'm one of those people. James 4:17 tells us, to him that knows to do good and does it not, to him it is sin. And Hebrews 10:26 tells us, if we deliberately continue sinning after we have received knowledge of the truth, there is no longer any sacrifice that will cover these sins. Guys, every time I looked at it, I knew I was wrong. Even though I knew I was in sin, I still could not stop. How many has been in that position before? Yeah. You know it's wrong, and you just still marching forward. But I just skipped ahead. And once again, porn became my comfort. But it still wasn't enough. In May of that same year, I began a relationship with a young lady. And it wasn't long before I began talking to her more than my own wife. In fact, I informed my wife one night, casually over dinner, that I wanted a divorce. And I just moved the conversation on like I'd never even mentioned it. And soon after, my relationship with the other woman became physical. And I would lay in bed at night next to my wife, and I would feel 1,000 miles away from her. I felt so disconnected from her, more so than at any other time in our marriage. I thought because my wife wasn't doing the things that I saw these female actresses do on the videos, well, my wife must have loved me. You see, porn killed my ability to love my wife. Selfishness and marriage cannot coexist, and at the root of porn is selfishness. And it was also a crutch if I was ever stressed, if I was bored, disappointed, filled with anxiety, if I was angry. You see, porn promises a lot of relief and escape, but it only provides shame and bondage. Now, like all good testimonies, this one has a rock bottom, and it's just around the corner. You see, guys, I've never been one to be depressed, but I was in a deep, dark hole that I'd never been in before. I was also becoming reckless, and I was becoming unglued. I even took out my own Backpage ad. Now, if you don't know what a Backpage ad is, imagine Craigslist, but a whole lot shadier, okay? So where a lot of shady deals go down. But anyway, I was offering myself as a male prostitute on Backpage. How insane is that? But that was the insanity of the addiction. I didn't have control of it. The pit had now become a prison. And I woke up one morning in August of 2017 to find that Annabeth had taken her daughter and had left. And she had found everything. Every text message, every email. She'd even found the Backpage ad. And that night, in the house by myself, I wrestled with God. I'd run for so long, I was tired. I was tired of carrying these chains. I was tired of being in that pit. I was tired of the shame and the guilt. I was tired of hating myself. Guys, I was just sick and tired. And I'm going to stop right here. And I'm going to redirect for just a minute. Because right here is where God met me down in that pit that night. And I have to give you some background and some context before I tell you what happened. And we're going to look at John 5:1. And I'm pretty sure that's a verse that we're all familiar with. And I'm going to paraphrase just to get into time. And it's basically saying that Jesus went to Jerusalem to a pool called Bethesda. And within laid a large number of disabled people, blind, lame, paralyzed. And one man was there who had been there for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him, he said to him, "Do you want to get healed?" Or no, better yet, he said, "Do you want to get well?" So, like many of you, I had known this story since I was a kid. And I've always asked myself, why in the world did Jesus ask this man if he wanted to get well when the answer is obviously yes? But this needs some context to better understand this. We must first know that the Jewish people are very, very generous. Being generous of resources is a huge virtue for the Jewish people. One of the ways the generosity of giving would show up is giving to people with physical disorders. If you were blind, lame, or had one leg, something that was visibly wrong with you, you could not work, and your job was a beggar. Back then, begging was a recognized profession. And part of what that means is that you were never apprenticed in any kind of trade because you're not going to be able to work that trade. And you were probably never educated because your family knew that you would never be in a position to use that education because they knew that you would be begging. And let's go on the flip side. Let's say that you are blind and I walk past you and I see you begging, and part of why that I, as a seeing person, would give you money as a blind person is me saying that, thank you, God, that I have my eyes. And out of that gratitude for me having eyes, I'm going to help you support your family, you who has no eyes. So now we understand this Jewish generosity, saying I have enough that I can help you in your time of need. So when Jesus learns that this man has been lame for 38 years, he knows that he has been a professional beggar. This guy has no education, no work training, and the only way he has to support his family is from begging. So when Jesus is saying to this man, I can heal you, but tomorrow how will you provide for your family? What he is truly saying when he asks, do you want to be healed is if the man is truly ready to accept the responsibility that comes with deliverance and healing. So he's also asking, are you ready to steward the wellness that I can bring you? You know what it is to live lame. Are you ready to be a walking being? You know what it's like to live wounded. Are you ready to live healed? We can stay in our addiction where it's comfortable. And we can live in our pity and our excuses. And it takes no action. It takes no responsibility to stay in our illness. For some of us, we will never answer. For some of us, we will answer no to Jesus because of the comfortability of complacency. With freedom comes uncomfortable responsibility. And that's why most people return to their oppression. Because we can't handle what stepping out into true freedom brings us. You see, the Israelites, they wanted to return to Egypt. They wanted to return to bondage because the oppression seemed better than the hardship of responsibility of freedom. So press on even when Egypt taunts you. freedom and deliverances from God, freedom and deliverances from God, responsibility is on me. And I think we see an example of responsibility in the next verse, John 5:8. And that reads, "Get up," Jesus told him, "pick up your mat and walk." Instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. He took up his mat. Why? Because the mat was the proof of where he had come from and to where he is now. The mat is the testimony. The mat is the responsibility. The proof is everything. And that's why in John 12, Lazarus was raised from the dead, and they wanted to kill him because Lazarus was literally the proof. It's our responsibility after the healing to take forth our proof, our testimony. We cannot stay the same after Jesus heals us. So, going back that night, when God met me in my pit, he showed me the way out. And it was only through Jesus Christ. He asked me, "Do you want to get well?" And I had to accept Jesus' work on the cross. And I had to accept that he is in fact forgiven me for the horrible things that I've done. And I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. For my shame and my guilt had made me somebody that I didn't even recognize. I couldn't even forgive myself. I was held under the weight of the shame and the chains in that pit of addiction. But Jesus showed me that I could be clean of it. I could be made as white as snow. I restored my relationship with God that night. Soon after, Annabeth came home, and I immediately started attending sessions with a therapist. We started seeing a marriage counselor to put back those pieces. Now, we didn't get back there overnight, but over time we did. Through prayer and a lot of work, our marriage is stronger today than it's ever been. God's grace restored a marriage that was dead. Within the month I was back in the CR. I had to call my sponsor, and I had to get accountability partners, and I had to work the steps, but also had to maintain that renewed relationship with God. And I had to put him at the center of it all. I had to confess my sins through 1 John 1:9. My prayer time and my Bible reading became a daily must, not just an option. My addiction had me so wrapped up in sin that I was literally drowning in it. And not only did grace rescue me, it set me free. And you know what they say? There is no sound louder than a captive who's been set free. And y'all, I'm able to stand here today and tell you that even in the midst of a global pandemic, that I am sober and I am free. I am 4.5 years sober from an addiction that nearly destroyed my marriage and my life. Thank y'all. Today, I'm the men's ministry leader of North Park Celebrate Recovery. I'm a sponsor. I'm a small group open share leader. I'm a step study leader. I'm the host of the Unashamed Recovery podcast. I get to travel and I get to share my testimony to groups all over the Southeast. And y'all are the very first group that I get to say this at. I'm the newest Celebrate Recovery state rep for Central Mississippi. And I continue to do all these things as a part of my recovery, my responsibility of being made well. These things, they are my step 12 that helps me to stay sober. And it's funny, all those years ago, I ran from that call to the ministry. I ran from God to the very thing that he would ultimately use me for, to share of his grace through my story with others in addiction. And I found that when I share the pain, I share the hope. And I've learned that when we recover loudly, we keep others from dying quietly. And through all of this, I have found that my life verse is Isaiah 61:1. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. The Lord has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from the darkness for the prisoners. For somebody who has struggled his whole life with purpose, I feel it is now clear where I'm meant to be, right here, helping those struggling with porn and sex addiction through my own freedom, and to let others know that there is hope for marriage after infidelity. For so long I found my identity in the porn addiction that had consumed me. Now I find my identity in Christ that has saved me from bondage. And I don't want to mislead y'all. I don't want y'all to think that I now have it all together and that I no longer face these temptations, because I still do. I still face the same struggles I once did. I faced them this morning. I just now know how to cope with those feelings and to cope with those temptations. I have to get up every day and I've got to work step 3. We made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. Each day has to start with me making a decision to not live my own will, because my will is what will produce a relapse. My will is what led me to my seat in recovery. And as I close out, I want to encourage you to be strong in the struggle by being strong in the Lord. For when we fight through our higher power, Jesus Christ, we don't fight for the victory, but we fight from the victory that has already been won. And as I close out, I want to invite Giving Grace back up. I believe they're going to play Rescue Story by Zach Williams. And that's probably one of my favorite songs in the world. And that's because that's my story in a nutshell. If y'all look back at my story, you'll see I never found healing in that pit until I put God into the center of all of it. And I put him in the center of that void that I was trying to fill. Some of you are in your own pit tonight. Now, your pit may not be pornography. You may be in a pit of alcoholism, substance abuse. You may be in a pit of divorce, depression, anger, grief, adultery. Or maybe you are in a pit of pornography. I don't know. But whatever that pit is, I want you to know that you do not have to stay there. Do what you have to do tonight before you leave this safe place and find healing by giving it to God. You do not have to keep living in this endless cycle of addiction. You can know freedom tonight. No matter how deep that pit that you're in is, or how heavy those chains are, there is a way out, and it starts right here. So, remember, once you're free from the shackles, don't start playing with the chains again. And ask yourself, do you want to be healed? Thank you for letting me share. And if you are struggling with pornography addiction in here tonight, you can meet me outside afterwards, and I would love to share some material with you to help you get over it. Thank you.
Crying out from the pit of my despair. There you were, in the shadow, holding out your hand, you begged me here. And now where would I be without you? Where would I be? Jesus, you were the voice of the dead, calling me out in the dead of night, fighting my battles for me. You were my rescue story, lifting me up from the ashes, carrying my soul from death to life, bringing me from glory to glory. You were my rescue story. You are my rescue story. You are redemption. 'Cause every time I ran away, you were stronger than my shame. And now would I be without you? Where would I be? Jesus, you were the voice in the day. Amen, right? Let me just say that in case you didn't catch it tonight, all praises go to Jesus. For his story, for your story, for my story. But don't get it twisted that it wasn't Jesus it wasn't God just pulling at Josh. It was God and Jesus using his wife to pull at him as well, because he will use the people in our lives. And those people can either be good influences or bad. I'm just going to be honest that my wife would have just shot me. There would have been no, we're going to try to work through this. She owns a gun and she's a better shot than I am. I'm just saying. She's thirsty. She's like this big, but she's thirsty. I want to say, man, that's probably one of the top testimonies I've heard. Because it feels the most real. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people in CR that have like drug addictions or alcoholism. But you just don't hear a man or a woman stand up and say, you know what? I wasn't addicted to any of that. I was addicted to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was my life before I decided to be a worship leader. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that's all I wanted to do. And so I felt that testimony, man. It meant a lot. And honestly, it means a lot that your wife stood there. She didn't, it's not like she said, okay, I'm just going to stand here and wait on you, because she didn't pack up and leave. But something about God just told her, this isn't over with. I'm not done with you two. If you'll hold strong and stay fast with me, I'm going to fix this. And that's just amazing. Because, I mean, look, nowadays we just give up. And a lot of our addictions is honestly us just giving up. We don't want to deal with life. And so we give into the addictions, whatever it might be. That's going to get us through. And to have people in our lives that will stand by you and never give up on you. On top of your Father not giving up on you, that's just amazing. So, Father God, we thank you so much for allowing us to be here. We thank you for these testimonies. And we thank you for the honesty in the testimonies.